autumn of 1907, the Federal Forest Reserve in the Arkansas Ozarks. A ranger named Josiah Vance, 46 years old, one of the first federal men ever posted to that reserve, 22 years a woodsman before that, walked a boundary line he had walked 100 times, and he dragged home behind him a sprung 40-pound steel bear trap that he had never set. Inside the jaws of that trap was something that was still breathing. Vance's logbook, the case number, the empty drawer. The full reconstruction is linked below. Grab it before you continue. To understand how strange this is, you first have to understand who Josiah Vance was. Because he was not the kind of man who told stories. He had worked that same stretch of high country for 22 years before the government ever pinned a badge on him. He knew the ridges the way most men know the rooms of their own house. And when the reserve was formed and he became one of its first rangers, he brought that same habit with him. The habit of writing everything down. His field log from those years still exists today, sitting in a private collection, and I have to tell you, it is almost boring in its precision. Weather noted to the hour, trail conditions, deer counts, the level of every water station, marked down each time he refilled it. Page after page in the same careful, unhurried hand, a man that exact does not wake up one morning and invent a monster. That is the first thing that stopped me. Because starting in the summer of 1907, Vance's logbook changes. Not the handwriting stays neat right to the very end. What changes is the content. He begins recording things that have no business in a ranger's field notes. Livestock found dead in a pasture with no blood and no wound anywhere on the body. A trapper's cabin up on the ridge where every single mirror had been turned to face the wall. He records these the same way he records rainfall, flat, factual, no comment, as if he were simply logging what the woods were telling him. Then there is the trap. The official explanation, when it finally came, would call it a nuisance animal, a bear working the boundary line. But Vance had set no trap on that ridge. He wrote that down plainly. The trap was already sprung when he found it, hauled half out of position, and caught in the teeth of it was a scrap of something he could not name. Not hide, not cloth. He described it in 3 words and then never mentioned it again. Which, for a man who described everything twice, is its own kind of signal. He dragged that trap down out of the back country through the mud, and 2 men would later swear that what he brought in with it was alive. But before any of that, before the station, before the deputies, there is a phrase in his summer log. It appears 4 separate times, in 4 different corners of his patrol, always carried in from the local families, and always written in the same neutral hand. It is not the name of any animal I have ever heard of, and once you know what it means, you cannot read the rest of his notes the same way again. The phrase was this: someone in the hollow had come home wearing the wrong walk, and the families were not describing a stranger. That is the part that took me a while to sit with. They were not saying a drifter had appeared at the edge of the woods. They were saying that someone they knew, a husband, a brother, a grown son, had come back through the door looking exactly right and moving exactly wrong. The voice was correct, the face was correct, but the way the body carried itself was off by a fraction of an inch, and the family dog would not go near it. It would back into a corner of the room, and it would not stop growling until the thing left. The official explanation of the day had 2 versions, and Vance recorded both without picking one. The first was rabies, a sick animal in the hills, nothing more. The second was a confidence man, some drifter working a cruel game on grieving country families, pretending at a resemblance to talk his way to a warm meal. But neither one holds when you lay it against the notes. Rabies does not turn every mirror in a cabin to face the wall. A con man does not make a dog that has known a man its whole life flatten itself into the corner and refuse to be calmed. And a con man, above all, does not produce the one detail that repeats across every account. The sense, reported by wives and mothers who had no reason to lie, that the person at the table was correct in every part except the whole, right in the pieces, wrong in the sum. I kept coming back to the dogs. In 4 separate entries, the dog knows before the people do. The animal in the house registers something the human eye takes days to catch, and by the time the family admits what the dog already told them, it is usually too late to matter. So we are left with a thing that is right in the voice, right in the face, and wrong in the body. Not a sickness, not a swindle, something else, and the oldest families in those hills. the ones whose people had settled the uplands before the county had a name, before Arkansas was a state, before there were any maps of that country at all. Those families already had a word for it. It was not werewolf. It was not demon. It was older than either. And Vance wrote it down. In the deeper Scots-Irish settlements up in the hollows, they called it simply the one who comes home. And there was a rule that came with the name, passed down mother to daughter for 150 years, and it never changed in the telling. You do not let it finish a full night under your roof. Because whatever wears the skin by night owns the memory by morning, and after that, you cannot tell the difference anymore, and neither can it. Set the extra plate if you must. Look away if you must. But do not let it sleep the whole night through in your house, or the person it is wearing is gone for good, and the thing at the table simply keeps their name. Now a lesser investigation would stop here and call it folklore. What stopped me is that Vance did not treat it as folklore. He treated it as a pattern with a location. Across that whole summer he mapped it, 60 square miles of ridge and hollow, and he worked it the way he worked everything, methodically on foot, filling the log. Which cabins? Which families? Which nights? He was not chasing a ghost. He was triangulating. And by September he had done something that no one in the region could remember anyone ever managing before. He had figured out where the thing denned during the daylight hours. He describes the place in his own hand. A dry limestone cut set high above a bend in the river, the kind of shelf a man could walk past 1,000 times and never think to climb to. He sketched its dimensions into the margin. He noted the approach. For the first time in the entire log, the thing stops being a rumour carried down from other people's houses and becomes a coordinate, a fixed point on the map that he could stand in front of. And that is the moment the investigation turns, because a thing that can be found is a thing that a certain kind of man will decide can be caught. The question stops being what is it, and becomes what would a careful man have to become to try. The final entry before the capture is a single underlined line. It reads only, tonight or never. He does not explain what changed his mind. He does not say what he finally used for bait. He went in alone, against every rule of the young service he had just sworn into. And on the night of October the 9th, 1907, he caught it. Everything the county erased, the names, the bones, the coordinates, sits in the document below. Take it now. What happened that night we only have in pieces, because Vance went up to that limestone shelf by himself, and no one witnessed the taking of it. What we do have begins at the reserve station, after dark, when he came in dragging the trap. 2 men met him there. Sworn deputies from the county, called out to help a federal ranger with something he would not fully explain over the line. And here is the first detail that mattered to me. Both men, independently, described Vance the same way that night. Not raving, not drunk, not out of his mind. Agitated, yes, but completely, carefully lucid. A precise man doing something precise under enormous strain. He would not let either of them near the cage without heavy gloves. He would not let either of them stand in front of it. And on the drive in, over the radio line, and then again at the station, he kept repeating one instruction, word for word, until it lodged in both their memories for the rest of their lives. Don't let it see your face for more than a moment. It only needs a moment. He had chosen the room before he even arrived. The rear room of the station, windowless, one door. He wanted it sealed. He wanted, in fact, to be locked inside it, alone with the thing, with the door secured from the outside. The deputies thought this was madness, and said so. Vance explained it, in a way that made a terrible kind of sense once you had heard the rule from the hollows. The fewer faces it could study, the fewer it could learn. He was not protecting himself. He was containing what it could take. For the first time in 22 years of reading those woods, Josiah Vance would not turn his back on anything. He set his lantern where it threw the light forward. He kept the cage in front of him, and he worked at nailing that back room, shut from the inside, while the deputies stood in the front office and listened to the shape in the cage shift its weight against the steel. One of them, against every instruction Vance had given, looked into the cage anyway. Of course he did. Any of us would have. And what he said settled onto its face in that first look. He would go on to describe the exact same way, without changing a single word, for the next 40 years of his life. He said the thing inside the cage had no fixed face when he first looked at it. He said the features moved, slow and searching. the way water finds the low ground in a field, spreading out and feeling for the lowest place to settle. And then it settled. It settled into the face of a man the deputy had known and buried years before. A face that no one standing in that station could possibly have described to the creature, because the deputy had never spoken of him there. The thing looked back at him wearing that dead face, and it said a private thing, a name, a small remembered detail, that only 2 people had ever known, and one of them was in the ground. The deputy walked outside and was sick in the gravel, and did not sleep right for a solid week. The second man never looked. He said, later, that not looking was the only reason he kept his mind, but he could still hear. And what he described hearing is the detail that changed the whole shape of this for me, because it tells you what the thing was actually doing in that cage. He said that whenever Vance stepped out of the room, the creature would begin a low, patient murmuring, not shouting, not pleading. He compared it to a man sitting alone in a parked car, practicing lines for a speech he means to give later, and every so often the murmur would land on a voice the deputy recognized, a woman long dead, a schoolteacher from his boyhood, and hold it a moment and then move on. It was not calling out to him, that is the part he could never shake. It was not trying to reach him at all, it was rehearsing, trying the voices on one after another, keeping the ones that fit and setting the others aside for later use. So consider what that means about the cage. One deputy could not look away and paid for it for 40 years. The other kept his eyes fixed on the floorboards, one hand near the door, and called himself the lucky one to the end of his life. And between them, in the steel, was a thing that did not behave like a prisoner at all. It was not testing the bars, it was studying the men who guarded it, learning the room, gathering faces, taking inventory. It was not begging to be let out. And on the 3rd day it stopped rehearsing voices altogether, because on the 3rd day it started to bargain. The bargain, as Vance recorded it, did not come as a threat. It came as an offer, and that is what made it dangerous. The thing told him, calmly, reasonably, that it had warned people in that county for a long time, that it remembered every one of them, completely, more completely than their own families now did, and it said it could give those memories back. It offered proof. It named a location out in the hills where a child who had vanished decades earlier could be found, and Josiah Vance, a federal ranger, a man of the law and of the record, did the thing that any careful man does with a claim. He went and checked it. He climbed to the place the creature named, a dry cave high above a river bend, of the kind no living person had any reason to enter, and inside it, exactly where the thing in the cage had said they would be, he found human remains, small ones, consistent with a child who had walked out of the hollow one day years before and simply never arrived anywhere. Sit with the arrangement of facts, because this is where an old hill country tale becomes something genuinely cold, a locked cage, a creature that had sat in a steel trap the entire time it spoke, and it knew, precisely, to the cave, where a body had lain hidden for years in a place no one had ever searched. There is only one way it could have known. It had been there, which means it had been in that county, wearing borrowed faces, for far longer than anyone had let themselves admit. And here is the detail that reframes the entire story. In all those years, no one had ever reported it. The families had not raised the alarm. They had simply, quietly, stopped saying certain names, stopped asking why a plate at the end of the table stayed set, year after year, for someone who had come home wrong. The skin changer was not hiding from the community up on its ridge. It was being tolerated by it. Somewhere, at some point, an arrangement had been reached, and the currency of that arrangement, the thing that had kept it running smoothly for a generation, was not fear, and it was not force. It was silence. You did not report what came home wearing the wrong walk. You looked away, and the deaths in your own family did not come. It was not even a secret, the way the old people later described it. It was a manner. It was simply how you were raised in that hollow. Josiah Vance had just broken it. By the 7th day, according to both deputies, Vance stopped trying to hand the creature over to anyone. He had requested a state specialist through the proper channels, filed the request on paper, the way he did everything, but somewhere in that week he changed course. He stopped waiting for help to arrive and started, quietly, trying to destroy the thing himself. He was too late. On the night of the 11th day, the second deputy, the one who never looked, was on watch alone in the front office. Vance was back in the sealed room with the cage, the same windowless room he had insisted on from the start, the door locked from the outside exactly as he had asked. The deputy heard the talking go on well past midnight. 2 distinct voices at first, back and forth through the wall. Then slowly only one voice, and then a little before 3 in the morning, nothing at all. He did not open the door. Vance had ordered him not to, no matter what he heard, until first light. He kept his chair. He kept one hand near the outer lock, which stayed engaged the entire night. He never left when they finally opened that room at dawn. The cage was standing open and completely empty. There was no sign of forced exit anywhere. No window. There had never been a window. The outer lock had held all night, and the deputy had not moved from his chair for 6 straight hours, and Josiah Vance was gone. Not dead on the floor, not slipped out past the guard. Simply not there, inside a sealed room that a sober man had watched without blinking until sunrise. The only thing left behind was his logbook, lying open on the concrete floor, turned to a final entry written in that same careful, unhurried hand he had used for 22 years. 3 words. "It knows me," that is the sentence he left. Not "it escaped," not "help me." A man who had spent a summer learning that whatever sleeps a full night owns the memory by morning. A man who had sealed himself in a room with the thing for 11 nights, wrote at the end that it knew him, and then there was no more of him to find. Within 7 days of that morning, the official report he had so carefully filed was gone from the county drawer. But whoever removed it made one small mistake. They took the document. They forgot the ledger, because the index line remained. The report had been logged into the county system with a case number and a date. That entry survives to this day, a single typed line pointing at a space where a document used to be. Somebody lifted the contents out of the drawer and never touched the ledger that recorded it going in. That one surviving line is the only reason we can say with certainty the report ever existed at all. And the response, when it came, was suspiciously fast. Matters that normally took the young service months to move on were handled here in a matter of days. The file pulled, the deputies quietly reassigned across the state, the questions closed before anyone thought to ask them out loud. Then I pulled the county index for the rest of that decade, and Vance's case is not alone. There are at least 9 entries just like it. A number, a date, a single line describing an incident. A herd dead in one night, a missing person. A child who came back from a weekend at his grandparents' unable to recognize the family dog. Every one of them assigned a clean case number, and every one of them followed within a month or 2 by an empty drawer. The numbers run in a tidy, unbroken sequence. The documents behind them are simply not there. It was never a bonfire in the county square. It was a subtraction, patient, quiet, one careful line at a time. Somebody had been keeping that ledger clean for a very long time. Vance was only the man who finally forced them to do it in a hurry, and within a year the reserve station itself was decommissioned, boarded up, the access road left to wash out, until it stopped appearing on the maps of that ridge as if nothing had ever been built there at all. The erasure of Josiah Vance is not the exception. Once you have seen it, you find it is the template. A credible, sober person records something real. The record enters an official system and is given a number, and then the record, and very often the person who made it, is quietly removed, while the ledger is left holding just enough of a scar to prove the wound was once there, bring it forward to our own time. A researcher went into that valley not long ago, following the story, and was told by the county in complete, honest sincerity that there had never been a ranger station on that ridge. No file for any man named Josiah Vance, no open case under the name they were given. The system had no memory whatsoever of the thing that once very nearly caught it, and in the same conversation, almost in passing, the researcher was told something else, that the reports had started again. Someone in the valley had come home looking exactly right and moving exactly wrong. The dogs had backed into the corner, which leaves the one question this whole account has really been circling from the start. When a record can be lifted cleanly enough that even the people who lived through it cannot prove that it happened. How much of the history you have been handed is the real thing, and how much is only the shadow it left in the drawer? Vance caught it alive. He learned it had worn his neighbours for a generation, with the hollow's silent permission. He found bones it could not possibly have known about. He wrote 3 words in a locked and windowless room, and then he was subtracted so completely that the valley itself no longer remembers his name. The cage was empty by morning. The report was gone by the following week, and out on that ridge the record always gets made clean in the end. Read the full reconstruction linked below. The names, the coordinates, every word Vance recorded, before it becomes one more empty drawer.